So now we're going to introduce another clinician to the workflow, this time a doctor. Much like the nurse, the doctor can walk up to any available workstation in their environment and tap their card to begin their session. Again, the doctor is being prompted for a two-factor authentication at this device, much like the nurse was. You'll see this is the first logon for the doctor of the day, so we're starting their session. And once we start the session, again, we're looking at who they are, a doctor, where they're at, a nurse station, and again, we mold the desktop for the workflow that's appropriate for them. We're giving them the appropriate applications, setting their correct default Windows printer, giving them the appropriate icons on the desktop, auto-launching their EMRs, and doing single sign-on into these applications, all with the tap of your card. Now, as a doctor, I might be sitting here working, but we could say, hey, you know what? I hear a code. A code's occurring in the patient room where the nurse is actively working right now. So I jump up out of my chair and I run down the hallway into the exam room. You'll notice the doctor didn't tap out at the nurse station. When the doctor walks into the room where the nurse is actively engaged with the patient, you'll see that the second I tap my card, Aventura will take care of instantaneously disconnecting any unsecured session you had elsewhere in the hospital environment. Also, you'll notice here at the nurse station where the nurse was working, we took care of securing the nurse's session. We're also prompting the doctor for their two-factor authentication at the exam room. In the background, we're already molding their session. And you'll see within a matter of seconds, a doctor can tap in his patient's room and immediately begin working their applications. But let's say that the nurse wasn't quite done working yet. The nurse can tap right back over the doctor and get right back into their session with their applications, looking at the information that's appropriate for them. Let's say the doctor needed to get back in and order some medications. The doctor can tap right back over the nurse, get back into their EMR, order the medications they needed for the patient. Let's say the nurse needed to get back in and make some notes that the medication has been administered. The nurse can tap right back over the doctor again and get back into their session. This is what we call fast user switching. This is highly valuable in locations where you might only have one computer in a room, but you might have multiple clinicians working in the same area. Think about an emergency department where you might have a doctor, a nurse, and a technician all working in the same room. In environments without Aventura, what I typically see happen in those scenarios is the first clinician in the room logs into the workstation, but then every other clinician who subsequently walks into the room just taps them on the shoulder and says, hey, can I jump onto that session real quick and look at some information? They do that because it's fast and it's efficient, but they break every security and HIPAA policy in the hospital in the process. But with Aventura, what we're seeing is because the clinicians can tap in and get access to their desktop in less than 5 seconds every time, they're no longer having to invent workarounds to be more efficient. And this also keeps the security side of the house happy because they're getting their checkbox met with their two-factor authentication needs. Now, everything I've shown you in this demo so far has involved two-factor authentication. But in some areas, Aventura can actually configure what we call step-down authentication. You'll notice now that when the doctor comes back to their nurse station and taps in here, instead of being prompted for the two-factor authentication, you'll see that this time they got right into their desktop just with the tap of a card. Aventura is highly customizable when it comes to authentication. Again, two-factor with password and PIN, or even step-down authentication. And all these rules can be configurable based on who you are and where you are.